Hello, and welcome back to Psychology 100 Intro to Psychology. Today, we're going to talk about history, people, and schools of thought. So, basically, how do we study the mind and how did we get here? So, Jordan walked into class and saw a big question on the board. How do we study the mind and how did we get here? Now, at first, Jordan thought psychology is just common sense, but the lesson quickly showed that understanding the mind takes different methods, key people, and evolving ideas over time. So the teacher began with the history and early thinkers. So long ago, scientists like Willem Wundt tried to study thoughts by asking people to describe their experiences, which is a method called introspection. Now, his approach, known as structuralism, actually aimed to break the mind into basic parts. Now, around the same time, William James focused on how thinking helps us adapt and survive. Now, this became functionalism. Now, Jordan, of course, realized that these early schools of thought were important, but also limited because they relied heavily on personal reports, which, of course, aren't always reliable. Now, because of that, psychology shifted to behaviorism, led like people like B.F. Skinner, who, of course, believed that only observable behavior should be studied. So instead of asking what people think, behaviorists looked at actions, like how, let's say, rewards and punishment shape behavior. Now, this actually made psychology more scientific, but it still ignored what was happening inside the mind. So Jordan thought about training a dog or even getting rewarded for good grades. Behaviorism clearly explained learning, but it didn't explain thoughts or decisions. Okay, now this, of course, led to the cognitive revolution, which is when scientists brought the mind back into psychology. Now, of course, inspired by computers, they began studying how the brain processes information, taking an input, processing it, and producing output. So Jordan then realized this is actually similar to doing homework. So reading a question, thinking about it, and then writing an answer. Now, this shift created modern cognitive psychology, which actually studies memory, attention, perception, and actually thinking in a more scientific way. Now, next, the teacher explained the major methods used to study cognition. Now, one key method, of course, is experiments. And this is where researchers control variables to see cause and effect relationships. For example, they might measure how quickly Jordan responds to a stimulus to understand reaction time. Now, this method is precise and scientific, but it doesn't directly show thoughts, of course, but only behavior. Now, another method is brain imaging, which is used in fields like cognitive neuroscience, which shows which parts of the brain are active during tasks. Now, this gives biological evidence, but it doesn't always explain exactly what someone's thinking. So then Jordan, throughout the day, also learned about case studies. And this is where scientists study one person really in depth, maybe often after a brain injury. So these studies provide detailed information, but they don't always apply to everyone. So there are observational methods where behavior is studied in real life settings, and these are realistic but harder to control. So finally, researchers use models and computer simulations to actually mimic how the brain processes information, which helps test ideas about thinking. Now, of course, when you look at all these different methods, each, of course, has strengths and each has weaknesses. So scientists often combine them to get a clearer picture. So by the end of the lesson, Jordan realized that cognitive psychology is built from both history and modern science. Okay, early schools like structuralism, functionalism started the conversation. Behaviorism made psychology more scientific, and the cognitive revolution brought the study back of the mind. Now, today, of course, multiple methods, experiments, brain studies, observations, and models, well, they all work together to explain how we think. Now, walking out of class, Jordan started noticing these ideas in everyday life. reacting quietly to a message reflect experimental research, remembering something connected to memory studies, and noticing habits tied back to behaviorism. So Jordan then realized that understanding the mind isn't about one method or one theory. It's about combining different approaches to understand something as complex as human thinking.